And either of you, if you see hands raised that I don't see, please let me know so that I don't miss them.
Yes, we will. I'll be watching and I'll let you know when we have raised hands.
All right, it's 11:31 by my count. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Maybe I'll.
Delaney Tonks and Cindy Phillips, we still need you to mute, please.
I think they might be using their phones as their audio, and so it doesn't actually show up. That's my guess.
I think I am muted. You can't hear me, correct?
Well, right now we can.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh, darn.
Duh.
The dashboard looks a little bit different. I'm trying to figure out where the mute button is. Can
Yeah,
somebody
go
look?
all the way to the top. For all of you on, if you go all the way to the top of the screen where it says view Ben Rasmussen's, viewing Ben Rasmussen's, whatever, there's a mute me button right up there.
Okay, it's showing that it's muted.
Now you are.
Thank you. I think we're ready to go.
All right.
Here.
Welcome to the what month are we in? August 2020 Law and Licensing Committee for the Utah State Board of Education. And thank you to all of the cyber participants that are braving this, because it is something I think we're all tired of. But here we are, safer than sorry. So that's good. I will begin by just doing a roll call vote of all of all committee members to make sure everyone's here, and so that anyone who's listening can know who is attending or who the committee members are. We don't always know everybody who's listening to us. So with that, and I'm looking at my participant list. Let me just call your names. Laurie Ann Thorpe, committee member.
I'm here.
Great. And Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
I'm here.
Thank you. Board member Mike Haynes.
Good morning, afternoon, whatever it is. Hello.
We've just had one long continuous day.
Yes, right.
And board member Cindy Davis.
Hello. Nice to see everybody.
Thanks.
It seems like so long since we've been together.
I say. We were having separation anxiety, I think. With that, I think we'll go right to the first action item, which is item 2.1 on our agenda. And thank you. Before we launch into that, let me just say thank you to the staff who had the late night that we did, and they were back and ready to go this morning. So thank you to all of you. And I couldn't even begin to name names because I think there were so many supporting us. So thank you. We'll launch into item 2.1, and let me just say at the outset, I do work with Box Elder School District, and I work with Box Elder School District, but this was a pretty non-controversial item. So I will participate in the discussion to the extent that we need to have discussion, but I won't vote. So with that, Angie, should I turn it over to you or Michelle?
Michelle Buse would be great. Michelle, are you ready to speak?
Okay.
I am. And I have had the great opportunity to work with Keith Meekum, and he is also on the line with us. And he is an assistant superintendent for Box Elder District. This is the last of our 4-day school week waivers that we needed to have updated in working with our school districts. And Box Elder District is not a district-wide waiver. It is only 2 of their most rural schools within their district that they have on the 4-day school week. They have Park Valley School and Grouse Creek Elementary, and they are very rural schools. Grouse Creek Elementary has on average 5 or fewer students, and Park Valley School has on average 50 or fewer students. And both of them are K through 10 schools. And they are such that the Grouse Creek School, in order for them to find a teacher to go out and teach that in that rural area, they've hired a teacher who travels 150 miles one way. And comes for the 4-day school week and teaches and rents an apartment there within the community for those 4 days, and then goes back home for the weekend. And in terms of the distance that students have to travel, for one of the schools, students travel from up to 40 miles away, and at the other school, they travel up to 150 miles to reach the school. So these are very outlying areas. And so there's some real valid reasoning behind why they try to condense the number of days, but they do extend the length of each school day so that they still meet the 990-hour requirement, but just reduce the number of days that those students and staff members have to travel to be able to get to those schools. And being able to combine these two into one makes it so that Box Elder District no longer has to do 2 different waivers. They were on different cycles, so that there were 2 years between when Park Valley School was renewed and when Grouse Creek Elementary was renewed. And now that we'll be putting them on that same cycle if you would choose to support this waiver. And they've provided all of the documentation that was requested of them in terms of their attendance levels, their student achievement levels. They provided surveys of their parents at both of the schools and provided documentation of that for you. They provided surveys of staff members and provided documentation of that for you as well. So they've tried to present all of the documentation that even whole districts have provided just for these 2 schools to help you feel comfortable in supporting them in continuing to have these 2 schools on a 4-day school week with those extended days. So with that, I will turn it over to you and remind you that Assistant Superintendent Meekum is here to answer any specific questions that you might have beyond what I have presented to you.
Thanks very much, AAG Buse, and welcome, Assistant Superintendent Meekum / Keith. We're glad to have you on the line with us. And with that, do committee members have any discussion or questions that they want to ask? I'm seeing no hands raised.
Agreed. No hands have been raised.
Okay. Then
Carol?
Yes, sir.
I would just maybe make note as what I'm seeing on the screen with the recommendation action has Grouse Creek as an elementary school. And although it does serve elementary students, it really should be noted Park Valley School and Grouse Creek School, where they both are K-10 schools. And so maybe just in the background and the recommendation, if we could change the elementary to actually say Grouse Creek School. Other than that, everything is accurate.
Thank you. That is a helpful correction. And Michelle, I guess you can make that in any paperwork you have to do, right?
I will be sure and do that. Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Meekum. I will make sure that that's taken care of in the agreement that I submit to the board when that's forwarded on. Thank you for that.
And thank you, Michelle, for all your wonderful help in this. Could I just ask one other question? The reason why we're delayed is in 2018, July, 2 years ago, I came into this position. And through the transition piece of 3 administrative, the superintendent and 3 assistants that all were new, somewhere in the line, we lost track of this every year, every 2 years, and it just never got passed on to me. And so neglectfully, and not really with an excuse, that's why we're delayed here. I just want to verify, is this an every 2-year process if in fact the board does approve this today?
Michelle?
Can you repeat that very end of that question again? I apologize.
No, you're fine. Is this application or request for waiver, is it an every year, every 2 years? Because during the transition of me coming into this job, somehow that didn't get communicated to me, and that's why we kind of dropped the ball, but it was certainly not on purpose.
It's every 3 years, sir.
It's every 3 years. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Oh, you've got some breathing room now.
I'll take it.
Yeah. We have a couple of hands raised. Board member or committee member Thorpe, do you have a question?
I was going to make a motion. If someone else has a question, they can do that first.
Sure. Yeah, hang on a second. Let's see if Cindy also had her hand raised. Or committee member Davis, did you have a question?
It doesn't pertain to the waiver, but I thought I heard him say, are these K-10 schools, not K-12 schools?
Yes.
And that would be a good question for Keith.
Yes, they are K-10. Once they hit a junior and senior year, then they come back into Tremonton to Bear River High School, or sometimes they end up leaving and going to Burley, Idaho, to attend school, specifically Grouse Creek. And so they either leave the state in 11th and 12th grade, or they go to our closest high school, which is Bear River High School.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, it is interesting. Thank you. Yes, committee member Thorpe, please make a motion.
I move that the committee approve the request for waiver from the 180 requirement in R277419 for Box Elder School District, Park Valley School, and Grouse Creek School, and forward a recommendation to the board for approval.
Thanks. Any discussion to that motion? I'm not sure when I insert the discussion, but I guess we had our opportunity. So the motion is that the committee approve the requests for waiver from the 180-day requirement in R277-419 for Box Elder School District, Park Valley School, and Grouse Creek School, and forward a recommendation to the board for approval. Any final discussion to that motion? And I'm seeing no hands. So we can vote, and I'm sorry, I guess we can vote by hands. Go ahead and let's see how this works. I always call names. So go ahead and vote. Maybe it's not going to show on
It's
my.
showing unanimous. I see 4 board members with green check marks, all 4 other
Okay.
than you.
And I'm on an iPad, and that's why I sometimes can't see your votes, but I will either have you vote by, we've only got 3 items, so maybe we can vote by name, but knowing it's unanimous, and I will abstain from that vote. So thank you. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Michelle, for your work on this.
Thank you so much.
you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Meekum. It was a pleasure working with you.
We'll do it again sometime.
Thanks much. Okay, moving on to the next item, which is item 2.2. And it's an action item, State Charter School Board Satellite Approval Process. And we have lots of people to participate and present. We have Daniel Davis. I'm thinking Angie will be assisting, Jennifer Lambert, and Marie Stephenson, all from the, State Charter School Board staff. And then also 2 board members, I think the chair and vice chair of the State Charter School Board, Dr. Delana Tonks and Dr. Cindy Phillips, which makes you folks sound really official and prepared. So with that, let me turn the time to, I think,
That will be me.
Jennifer, probably?
Well, actually, do you mind if I just give a little summary, Board Member Lear, first?
No, that'd be great. And then actually, Cindy's going to chair this part. Board member Cindy Davis is going to chair this part because I have some amendments to propose, and I thought it might be a little bit cleaner. So it will go then from Cindy, or from you, Angie, to committee member Davis.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to give some background before we turn time or Board Member Davis turns time over to the State Charter School Board to present or provide information to the committee. Just as a reminder, our board rule R277552 requires authorizers to submit a process to the board on new charter school application processes, expansions, replications, satellites, and remediation. And as you know, we have reviewed all of those processes except for this one. This is the last one on that list that we'll be reviewing and considering today. So the other thing I wanted to let you know, and Danny Davis wasn't able to join us today, but we did have staff, internal staff. It's a committee of about 8 people, reviewed the State Charter School Board's process and provided feedback to the State Charter School Board before they approved their process as a board on July 28th. And so I just thought it would be helpful for you to know about staff work behind the scenes and feedback that staff gave to the State Charter School Board before they finalized their process, which is before you today. And that's it. Board Member Davis, I'm happy to turn the time back over to you.
Thanks, Angie. Did we have any members of the public that were here to speak about this process or this agenda item?
No, we only have the 4 members, the 2 staff and the 2 board members. So no other public comment no one else is asked to comment.
Okay, so did the 4 members ask to comment, or are they just here to answer questions?
Jennifer, I think Director Jennifer Lambert might be a good person to ask that question too.
If I may,
Please. Please.
So we would like to have member Cindy Phillips start out and introduce, and then from there, Marie Stephenson will share with you the differences from what you saw, I believe it was just last month, in the expansion request. And then after that, Chair Tonks will be able to share some closing, I guess, remarks or whatever. And then we are all here to answer questions if you have any.
Great. We'll turn the time over to you in that order.
Okay, this is Cindy Phillips. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. One of the things that I wanted to start out by saying that we've had a really great collaboration with many committee members on this Law and Licensing Committee, and we appreciate the opportunity to come and to utilize this meeting as a collaborative moment as well. And we've appreciated the feedback. One of the things I wanted to ensure that this committee understands is that we have taken to heart the sort of the philosophical approach, which what has been elaborated on by numerous members of this committee. And in particular, we have embraced two philosophies relative to this satellite approval process. And one is that we come to this meeting with a full understanding and support of the importance of the work that applying schools need to do in order to be considered for a satellite approval. Like this committee, and I assume other members of the USBE State Charter School Board members feel that schools who are applying need to bring evidence, need to do all the back work, need to do the heavy lifting. Not USBE staff, not SCSB staff with regard to that, because they're asking for something special and they need to demonstrate their fitness and excellence as a school to for opening a new school in another location. That's the first philosophical stance that we think we share with this committee and with members of the USBE. The second philosophical stance, while it isn't proper for it necessarily to appear in an application, is a BAT process of essentially a rigorous process for checking whether or not schools have met and are continuing to meet academic criteria, governance criteria, financial criteria. We have paralleled our back process of checking those sorts of things on the numerous ways that the USBE does very effectively. And I think that I simply wanted members of this committee to know that we have improved and made more rigorous that particular process as part of our check on, rather than simply assurances, our check on what schools bring to the table when they ask for a new satellite. Thank you very much.
I believe I was going to be presenting next. Is it okay if I go ahead?
Please do. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. This is Marie Stephenson. I am a staff member with the State Charter School Board. My role today was to kind of walk through some of the changes and what is different in the satellite application versus the expansion request. You will notice that all of the board rules are followed and outlined as they were with the expansion request as well. However, the satellite application is more robust for the schools, as it is a more robust ask that the schools are making. One of the first changes that we did was add some definitions to various places in the application where there might be some question as to what was being asked, which was a great recommendation that we got from USBE. Also, the State Charter School Board members recommended that we add a budget section where the new campus and the existing school are going to show both a budget for the individual campus as well as for the satellite, and how the satellite will impact the school's finances. There were 2 assurances added, making sure that we met those required minimum standards. One was for program accounting as well as for land trust. There is a more robust market analysis in the satellite application, and the school has the burden to show the market demand and the outreach that they've done in the new community. And again, that is something that is a more robust question than in the expansion application. We did add to the academic success portion as well. And we want to know more about the grade levels that they're going to be serving, the populations that they'll be serving, as well as the educational approach and philosophy, and if that will need any changes to be able to meet the needs at the satellite school. Under the operational success section, we've added additional questions about administration and governance and the differences that will be occurring as a result of the satellite campus, as well as a place where they can speak to new hires or employees that will be serving both schools, and just really explain how that's going to look with a satellite addition. And then finally, we added a section about contracts, and they have the option of both including if it's something they've already entered into or something they intend to enter into with those contracts. And that is very similar to our new school application. And we feel like that will help give some very useful information regarding the satellite. Within these, they're going to outline the services that will be provided or that are intended to be provided, how the decision to work with the vendor was reached, what oversight and monitoring will be occurring, as well as internal controls within the relationship. So those are the additions that we have that are adding more than just the expansion application. And thank you for allowing me to share that.
Member Davis, is it all right if I close up? This is Chair Tonks.
Please do. Thank you.
All righty. We just want to thank staff. The committee that Deputy Superintendent Stallings mentioned that collaborated and worked hard to fine-tune the satellite process for approval. And just as a recap, we'll use the guiding philosophies of schools doing the lion's share of the work as appropriate, and then making more robust this entire State Charter School Board satellite process so that we can verify that the work has been done. Marie covered the additions to the assurances, market analysis, academic success, and a couple of other areas. And finally, we appreciate the approval of all of our previous processes, and we are confident that this one is one of the most robust processes that we have worked together to compile. And we appreciate the committee's consideration of our satellite process and request that we can get it approved. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Board members, do we have any thoughts or input?
You've got hands from Vice Chair Cummins and Chair Lear.
Board Member Davis, are you having audio problems?
Sorry. Yes, I was. Chair Cummins, let's hear from you, Vice Chair Cummins.
I'm ready to make a motion if that's appropriate.
I had a series of amendments, so maybe it would be better to do that first, or that would be up to the chair.
Amendments on a document that's, we're here to approve or deny someone else's document. I don't know that we can make amendments.
Then maybe I'd like clarifying questions.
Okay.
That would.
Then I'll wait.
Angie?
That might evolve into amendments.
Yes, Board Member Davis.
Angie, can Board Member Cummins make a motion and then can Chair Lear make amendments to the motion?
Yes, I think that makes sense to start with the motion to pass or, approve and then go with amended motions or amendments to the motion.
Sorry to interrupt, but this is a document that is ours to approve or deny. The State Charter School Board approved this. We can't amend it. It's not our document to amend, is what I mean.
I got you. I apologize. I misunderstood the question. I was thinking of procedure and not the overarching question of Vice Chair Cummins. So I think that is a good question. This is not, as I think Vice Chair Cummins just stated, it's not a USBE document or rule, et cetera. So at this point, I think maybe Board Member Lear could express her feedback on the document, and then it would be up to the committee members to determine whether the document was ready to be approved or not, or whether the committee, if the committee feels uncomfortable approving it today, giving that feedback to the State Charter School Board, I guess, and asking them to return. So I think you're right, Vice Chair Cummins, that seems like the right procedure is to approve or deny the document as is. If we're going to deny it, give them the feedback, which may include feedback from Board Member Lear on what should be changed. Hopefully that helps.
And and I'm fine with that also.
Thank you.
Because some of my clarifying questions and some are, yes, they are suggestions, and probably my preference would be to bring it back another time, but clarifying questions would satisfy me. So should I proceed, Chair?
So let's have the motion on the table and then let's have to the motion.
Okay.
Go ahead, Brittany.
Thank you. Then I move that the committee approve the State Charter School Board's process to approve satellite requests and recommend to the board for approval.
Thank you. And we do have a hand, Chair Lear.
Yes, I have a number of questions, and if it's okay with the committee, I'll just proceed through them. And they are, some of them are questions, some of them are alternate language that I would like the State Charter Board to consider. One of them is especially concerning, that is a little more comprehensive. And if I'll just proceed through them, there are about 10, not all of them are equally long. So if that's okay. So if you're looking at the document itself, the approval process, I'm looking at on page 3, and thank you, by the way, for the page numbers. Made it very much easier to review. I'm looking at page 3. There's the second box down, and it says met. Actually, and I have to look at both of these at the same time, so I'll move it over here. Met all academic goals, and I'm wondering why you would not want to say meets or exceeds rather than met. So meets, first of all, sounds like a better term, and then or exceeds. Is there a reason that you wouldn't want them to be at least meeting, but hopefully exceeding as an exemplary school? And I guess that's addressed to anybody who of the group here would like to answer, either the board members or chair or director member.
I think I could answer some of that. Certainly that's language that we could consider. I think the reason the past tense was used here is that it's upon receipt of the application have all academic goals been met in the charter, rather than just a present tense. And then also I think the other thing that we're thinking about here is that the academic goals in the charter agreements, which many of which have been redone in the last 5 years to become more rigorous, are very rigorous. And so I don't think that necessarily we thought of the language as exceeding them as being helpful.
So you wouldn't think an exemplary school would necessarily exceed the basic goals of the charter agreement?
Well, my point is many of these goals are not what you would call basic. They might be that 80% of the students are, at or above grade level in math, reading, and science, and so on. And so I'm just not sure that we need to, that we thought it necessary, given the nature of the goals that are being set and reworked by charters. We felt like if we've accepted their goals already, they're already rigorous. And so exceeding them as opposed to meeting them didn't seem to add value, but certainly we're open to thoughts about that.
And I'll just leave that for your consideration then. I don't need to belabor every one of these. I just wanted to at least present it to you for your consideration. I'm looking at the third box down now also on page 3.
There was a hand from Director Lambert. I think she had something to add.
Sorry, and I didn't see that.
So I don't know what's the process here to jump in, but I do want to clarify what we're looking at on this page. This page is the page that staff reviews that to ensure that a school is meeting the minimum standards outlined in board rule. And so this is what staff reviews. If a school is not meeting the minimum standards outlined in board rule, we will not forward on the application to the board for their consideration. Now, whether or not a school is a high-performing school, they're exceeding and all that, that is a consideration that's done by the board when the school is making their presentation to get for their request of a satellite. However, this right here is just addressing if they're meeting the minimum standards so that their application can even be heard.
And if you were addressing that to me, I do understand that. I just think it would also be helpful for both the state charter board, who would review it next, and perhaps if the state board acquired this paperwork, to see that the school could have exceeded, even at that first review, some of the standards that were set in the charter. So I don't think asking if that was exceeding that is out of line. So I would just ask for your consideration of that thought. I'm looking now at the third box.
Board member, sorry, Lear, and remember Davis, I'm not sure if you saw, sorry, Vice Chair Cummins, you had your hand up and now you're down. So did you want to say something or?
I'm just wondering kind of where this conversation is going. If we're going to nitpick every word, I mean, because obviously if something's met, it could exceed it. They're just talking about minimum standards, and I'm just hoping that we're not going to nitpick every word in here unless there's a real policy thing that we're looking for.
And if you're addressing that to me, Vice Chair Cummins, I recalled reading a rule and a policy a few months ago where we actually did carefully review all the words of it. And I feel like this is the chance, the only chance now the board has before it is in the hands of the charter board as the way the law has been interpreted. So I don't feel like I'm nitpicking. I feel like I'm doing due diligence as a board member in the role I have. So I don't intend to nitpick words, but I do intend to ask all the questions I have as the last chance before this policy becomes a standard for schools to receive a lot of money. And I was so disappointed several months ago when this process was not as robust as it is now, that I want to make sure I've done everything I can to make it robust, and then I don't have anybody to blame but myself if mediocre schools are come to the board.
Chair Lear,
Yes.
might I ask you to state each of your questions, and then we'll have maybe one person from the charter community share a response, and then we'll move to the next question. And then if you have summative comments at the end, then that way we make more quickly go through the concern, the response, the concern, the response, the concern, the response, and then you could make some summarizing statements at the end. Would that be okay?
That's fine. Yeah,
Okay.
I should have said what I just said at the beginning, that I feel like this is the chance the board has. And this committee may not agree with me, the board may not agree with me, but I made such a point the last time that I don't want to lose the opportunity as a board member to express my concerns about this process. So yes,
Okay.
I will follow exactly what you outlined.
Thank you.
So the third box, again, going to the third box on the on page 5, or excuse me, it's the third box on page 3. And there's a word comparing this proposed school to nearby schools. I'm not clear what that means. Do you think that's clear enough? Do you think you could come up with a perhaps a better adjective there that would be more clear what this school should be compared to, or proposed school? That's the question.
Board Member Davis, it looks like Jennifer Lambert is prepared to answer.
Thank you, Jennifer. Go ahead.
Just as a question, Member Davis, do you want me to just kind of jump in, or do you want me to continue to raise my hand? How would you like us to proceed?
I would like you to jump in.
Okay, then that's what I'll start doing. Again, I just want to reiterate, this is coming directly from the board rule R277552-7. That is how it is stated in board rule, and that is what we are looking for. In terms of then the school in the actual academic performance where they're describing and making their case to the board, that is where the more information is given, and that the school must make a compelling case. But this is just the minimum standards that would meet decide whether or not they can even be heard by the state charter school board.
So maybe Jennifer didn't hear my question. What is a nearby school?
As I said, it is what we took exactly what is in the board rule, and that is what is said in board rule.
And would you just double check that, Cindy, Angie? And if that is so, you don't even need to put the rule up. Just if it's so, I don't remember the rule well enough. If we lost that opportunity in the rule, then it's gone. But I was feeling like nearby is not very clear.
That is the language in the rule, Chair.
Yes.
All right.
And Board Member Lear, if
Yes.
you would like, I could remind you of some of the conversation around that. Part of the difficulty, or no, we just move on?
In order to move it on, yeah.
Okay.
If it's in the rule, we lost the chance.
It is
So
in the rule, and we did
then,
discuss it.
then that's okay. Then we'll let that go for now. I'm moving down to page 4. And again, a suggestion in terms of language, it says, and this would be the next to last bullet on page 4, explanation of how governing board decided to seek a satellite school. I don't think how was the right word. I don't care. And maybe the explanation would be a little broader than that, but why is the question that I would ask on that. And I don't know that I need a response. I'm just suggesting that how we argued for 2 hours or we looked over data isn't as helpful to me as why was a charter school asking for a satellite school. So I don't necessarily need a response. I'll just, unless you feel an urgent need to make a response.
So I do want to make just a very quick response. That is from our experience. The how actually gives us very good information about why. We ask more specifically about the why later on in the market analysis, but we do find that the how is very meaningful.
Okay, thank you. Page 5, the first box, the 5th line down. This is one of the things I feel strongly about, and I would vote against this process unless it is approval of the process, unless it is changed. It says, again, page 5, first box, 5th line down, satellite application and the USBE, and it says right now has received notice of the SCSB's action, and I'm not reading it as it's written now. Let me read it as I would propose it to say, because this is when the students begin to enroll in this satellite school. Satellite application and the USB has reviewed the SCSB's action in a board meeting, and then the students could enroll. I feel like that is an appropriate time for enrollment, not when it is simply the SCSB has acted, because this must come, those schools must come to the board as we experienced before. Is that not true?
May I step in?
Sure. I mean, Cindy, you said you could, so.
So what we are doing here is we are following what the process that is outlined in statute. According to statute, the authorizer is to be making the decisions. We notify USBE of the result. It is only if USBE has concerns that we did not follow the process appropriately, then there is that review. But as the authorizer, the State Charter School Board is the entity that would be authorizing this.
But the USBE would not know that until it reviewed that SCSB action in an open meeting. Is that not true?
Again, I think that there may be some misunderstanding of what the statute says. The statute no longer has USBE reviewing each and every approval that authorizers make.
Well, then why did we have it on our agenda? The statute didn't change between the agenda we had a few months ago where it was on our agenda.
Board Member Lear, could I answer that?
Sure.
So the process now, it is correct. Jennifer Lambert stated it correctly. There is no longer in statute or board rule a requirement for the board to review it in a board meeting. You may remember that what the statute states, and I apologize, I'm going to try and remember the number of dates. days. I believe it's 60 days. It could be 45 days. But after an authorizer takes action, whether it's to grant a satellite, to approve an application, the State Board of Education has 60 days to ask the authorizer to reconsider their actions. So to essentially kind of remand it back and say, please reconsider your actions and ideally provide some reasons for why they want that. But that only would be in the case that something is brought to the state board's attention. And so the reason we had an agenda item, you'll remember back in like February, March, was because board members had requested that the board make a motion to do that very thing, to remand it back. But there's not a proactive or an affirmative need to have an agenda item to review that. It would be more as something is brought to board members' attention, then board members could request an agenda item to implement that 60-day kind of remand or request for reconsideration.
So then it seems that we should at least wait to have students enroll until that time period has passed, allowing the state board members to perhaps request that that be added to an agenda. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and I believe for most of the processes, for example, expansion requests, satellite requests, these are all happening before October 1 of the year, the next fall when students would be enrolling. So there, even if you were to build 60 days in there, you should still be at least 6, 8, 9 months before any students would be served. Now they might be enrolling, I guess, in January, February. That's a timing issue, but ideally these requests or the authorizer actions should be occurring well in advance of the time that students would begin enrolling or be served, and that should give the board time to give input.
And then I think that if the charter board understands that I will be asking, as long as I'm a board member, for every single one of these to be on a board agenda to ask questions, that students can't be enrolled until that 60-day period is passed, then I think that I can live with that. I would otherwise ask to think about restructuring that statement to make sure all the appropriate times are passed before students are allowed to enroll.
Yes, the last thing I just wanted to mention, you'll remember that the satellite applications that were discussed back in February, March of this year,
Right.
those were for satellites for fall of 21, I believe. So it wasn't even for this upcoming fall, it was for the next fall.
And yet, one of those schools had posted on its website that a school was opening and students could enroll now. So clearly there was a misunderstanding about the enrollment process by the satellite school, proposed satellite school at the time.
Can we give the charter community an opportunity to say something and then let's move to the next one? Is that all right?
Sure.
I just want to reiterate that we believe that this is in accordance of statute 53G-5-304.
And that's great. Thank you. And I will be asking for those to come to a board agenda every time. Thank you. My next item is also on page 5. And it is the final paragraph. And this is a little uncertain or concerning to me. It says, attach a clear, specific, concise response about the proposed target population. And then it describes, it has a description of the target population. I'm not sure how 2 years in advance, as you just pointed out, that anybody could state with any certainty or foresight the percentage of students who are an ethnic or racial minority, the percentage of students with disabilities, the percentage of economically disadvantaged students, the percentage of students who are learning English. if that was intended to apply to the mothership, that's different. But I'm not sure unless a school was being proposed that was targeted at a specific population, how any of this other information would be even a thoughtful guess. And in fact, I have some concerns about guessing, because that could suggest some level of preferring one population over another. So I'm just asking for a little clarification on what you meant there.
If I may, this is still Director Lambert. This is a great question, and I appreciate the opportunity to clarify on this of what we mean. We also ask this of our new schools, and we do realize that it is kind of a shot in the dark. That they may say that we're going to get, and usually 99 times out of 100, what we get is that they just look at what the district of that area, what their demographics are, and they just put in those demographics.
I lost you, Jennifer, there. I'm sorry, would you repeat the first part of your sentence?
Sure. Not sure what
not after 99% of the time, then.
Okay. What the applicants put in there is they just look at what the district or the surrounding schools, what their demographics are, and that's what they put in there. However, we do find that that is useful for a couple of reasons. One is it does require them to look at the demographics of the surrounding area and to make that a consideration, because some of these schools, they could be going into an area that's very similar to where they are now in terms of demographics, but they could also be going into an area that is very different. And we want to make sure that they are at least looking at the data and reporting the data, that they're considering what their actual demographics might be for this area, that if it's going to be a lot different from their current demographics in their current school, then we're going to be looking for in their education program a discussion about that, about how their program will be able to serve the needs of the different demographics. The other thing that this allows us to do is if they do report to us very different demographics than what we would expect for the area, that would be a warning sign for us.
I appreciate that. I'm just still concerned that this is maybe hopeful information. I don't think this is anything data-driven that a school could provide, and not particularly useful, and has the potential for discrimination, unless the school is targeting for instance, Hispanic population, or if it's intended as a school for students with disabilities, or that's the predominant focus. So I would again wish that you would rethink that. It doesn't satisfy me. I'm sorry, Cindy asked me not to respond on everyone. I won't. That still concerns me.
Thank you. Let's go to the next one then. Thanks, Carol.
Moving along. I'm not sure what you mean. This is just maybe a missing word. On page 5, on number 3, describe the enrollment practices, processes, and policies of the proposed school, the satellite school, or are you meaning to say the school that's requesting the satellite?
So this is under for attach a clear, specific, concise response about the target population. So this would be, the assumption is of the satellite school. However, our assumption again is if it differs significantly from their current school, we're going to be digging into that and asking that. So in many ways, that's why it's left generic and general, because we would expect that their enrollment policies would be aligned with their current open campus, but if it isn't, then we would want descriptions and explanations.
I just suggest that you then put both schools so that the person knows, the applicant knows what you mean. The proposed school and the requesting school, because I was unclear when I was reading it. Moving to the next one. You said you added, this is on page 8. You said you added some definitions, which I appreciated. Probably I would have preferred a little more technical definitions, not just what I felt like were made up definitions, but specifically looking at academic success on page 8. I was looking at the 5th line down and was hoping that, because it starts out by saying, by checking this box, I certify the school is academically successful, provides educational services. All of that is spelled out, but it doesn't ever require that the school seeking to have a satellite can show, using data, benchmarks, and satellite and statewide assessments, student growth metrics. It never requires that there's a showing by the school seeking the satellite of actual student growth. It asks for, there's processes, but there's no growth requirement. And I understand, as you rightly pointed out, Jennifer, this is the very first review by your staff, so the charter board staff. So I would think you'd want data of some kind, benchmarks, statewide assessment results, growth metrics, something other than just, here's how we've tried to work with students.
So if I may, first I want to correct, we are now into the, not into the minimum standards, we're into the discussion, and where the school must provide a convincing narrative to the state charter school board. So this isn't just the minimum standards that would determine whether or not they could be heard by the board. This is the language and the justification that the school is putting forward. But I do want to point out the second paragraph in there where it says it's very important that the charter requesting a satellite campus be able to show it is academically successful. And then it goes on, and what we're doing is we're putting the onus on the school to be able to make a convincing and strong argument using objective evidence and data that they are successful and that they're meeting or exceeding their academic goals, and they're putting them on track to obtaining post-secondary success. Because charter schools, that one of the purposes in statute for charter schools is to look at different ways to hold schools accountable, to look at academic performance. We are open to different ways that may be done, but the onus again is on the school, and that they must provide objective data. And that objective data, of course, would not be that they just think that they're good or that they feel that they're good. They have to provide some kind of test scores, but we aren't going to define that in here because we believe that that is not in line with the purposes outlined in statute for charter schools.
And thank you for that explanation, but I still feel like the academic success by some data point should be listed, or that above the sentence that says the satellite request cannot be approved without that information. That troubles me.
Thank you for that exchange.
I'll be looking for that on future schools. And the last item I had was on page 9 on student safety. I raised this 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I also raised it 2 or 3 months ago. And I'm sort of troubled that it was ignored as a board member. It says, describe any student safety issues that have occurred and how the schools resolved them. I think it would be appropriate for the applicant to find USBE data, USBE information, and provide that with the application, and not expect that to be found by USBE staff, USBE themselves, or SCSB. I would, again, strongly urge you to consider requiring the applicant to present the information that the USBE has and not have us go looking.
I apologize if you feel like we disregarded, we did not feel that we were disregarding anything that you were suggesting. Again, I just put in that these are the things that the school is to respond to. Anything that the school gives definitely would put them in a better position. But please know that while this is the application that the school will respond to, we will still follow our processes as the State Charter School Board staff, where we will look in our own records to see if there are any student safety violations. We also contact the different USBE departments to ask if they have any concerns. So we still do our due diligence and do not rely simply on what the schools say, because I guess there's a fear if there's a serious student safety violation and the school is hiding it, that they could also maybe not report all of the data. So we're always going to do our due diligence on this.
Those were my concerns. Thank you. Thank you, Board Member Davis.
Thank you. So I've just been kind of thinking through what the process here looks like and what the options are. We have a motion on the table to approve this document, and then if I'm understanding, and I hope that Angie will jump in and correct me if I'm misunderstanding any of this. So our options are we could approve this today, we could move it, then it would go straight to the full board for approval. My question for Angie, and I was trying to ask in text, I guess maybe we need to hear from some other committee members. Do they have similar concerns? But the question for Angie is, if we approve this document today, can the State Charter School Board choose, if they want to, incorporate some of this feedback before it comes to the full board to approve? If they do choose to do that, would it need to go back through their board, and would it need to come back through this committee prior to going to the full board? Or could they, if they choose to, some of the feedback, incorporate it, I don't know, as some kind of imperanthen or something, and then bring it to the full board? Could you help us understand that process?
Sure. I think that ideally, if there's feedback or changes that this committee would like the State Charter School Board to make, probably the best, what would make sense is to indicate what that feedback is and then allow the State Charter School Board to consider that feedback and bring it back here to committee, because at the end of the day, it is their document. Because I think what happened in a prior similar setting like this, the committee approved it, there was feedback, and I think the State Charter School Board staff and board were a little confused about what the expectation was of whether it was approved or not. So this is it's difficult because, again, it's not our document, so we can't amend real time and take those motions. But so ideally, I think you're right. It would be give them the feedback, say we're not approving it today, and then have them bring it back with whatever feedback you all have. Or if there's certain things that are just technical, I mean, the other thing that could happen is you approve it, assuming that the board is willing to, State Charter School Board is willing to accept certain feedback. They could take that to their board next week when they meet. If the State Charter School Board agreed to it, then by the time it comes to the board in September, as long as all those changes were approved during the State Charter School Board's meeting on August 13th, then the board could just move forward. But because it's a little awkward, unlike a rule or other motions where everything is in control of just the state board, we're working with another entity at this point. So I think there's kind of pros and cons to either approach. But either way, I think it would be good to know of Board Member Lear's concerns. How many or which of those is the full committee want to request the State Charter School Board to incorporate, or is the committee okay with the document as is? I think that would be the first step.
Okay, is there further discussion from the committee? I see Brittany Cummins' hands.
Yes, thank you. I appreciated the questions asked and the feedback that was given from, or the answers given from the State Charter School Board representatives. And I'm comfortable with the document as is and moving forward with it.
Thank you. Do we have any discussion from other committee members?
You have a hand from Member Lear.
Board Member Lear, Chair Lear.
I'd like to make a substitute motion that the State Charter Board, given that their meeting is coming right up, would at least consider this information as a full board, these concerns, because I feel very strongly, again, this is the committee's, this is the board's opportunity to make this process something that isn't only satisfactory to the State Charter Board, but is also satisfactory to the state board. And it's not quite there yet for me. So I'd like a substitute motion that it is reviewed by the State Charter Board with my recommendations. Granted, they are only mine, and any others that maybe have occurred in this time period, and that it come back next month to the committee.
Angie, can you address that procedurally?
Yes, I apologize. One other thing I failed to mention is that I believe that the State Charter School Board is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer or someone else, that they are considering approving some requests for satellites this year, and that has to be done by our board rule. The deadline is in October, and so I do believe the State Charter School Board was hoping to get this approved by the full board in September so that they could use this process in their September board meeting to approve or deny requests for satellites. So there is a bit of a timing and an urgency, but I would ask if somebody from the State Charter School Board could correct or let us know whether there is a timing issue.
May I speak to that? This is Director Lambert.
Please.
I was thinking along the same lines, however, for slightly different reasons. So our satellite application is set to be due November 1st. We don't have to worry about that October 1 deadline because we're already a year ahead. So we would not be approving schools right now to open up next year. It's always 18 months. However, as you can see, this is quite a robust application. There is a lot to it. And we want to be able to give schools as much time as possible to be able to put together a good application and a good proposal if they wish to do so, rather than a last minute one. And so we rushed to be able to get it to our meeting and approved so that it could be heard in this committee meeting, so that then it can be passed by your full board in September. That would give the schools the rest of September and October to be able to put together the proposal. If it has to come back to this committee meeting, then it would not be approved until October. And then they only have a few weeks to be able to get that proposal together for this year.
Thank you. And I do see two more hands from our board members. Just to clarify with Angie. So in light of all of that, I would lean toward approving the document today under the substitute motion, if that's a viable procedural request, to have the State Charter School Board consider that feedback prior to the document coming to the full board. I just want to double check, and I apologize because I know you answered that. Can that happen without the document coming back to this committee again? Can we make the motion that Carol suggested, which is approving the document with a request that some of the feedback be considered and then having the document go to the full board with or without edits.
Sure. I think that the one thing you have to consider is the cons of that approach are what if the board considers the feedback from the committee, and let's say that they incorporate 2, but 3 they don't, then that comes to the board and you will likely will potentially have a discussion about why 3 items weren't incorporated and 2 items were, and what that means for the board. So I think that's just the risk that you would take, is that then you might have to have something similar to this discussion with the full board. And so the question is what's the risk of that happening? And to the State Charter School Board, what does it mean by consider? Does it mean consider it? And what if they say thank you, but no thank you to all 5? I get it would probably be helpful for the committee to say, we feel really strongly about 1 and 2. The rest we just want you to think about, but just kind of wanted to give you that feedback. It might be hard for them to understand what the committee expects by just saying, please consider these things. Is it that the approval is contingent upon incorporation of them, et cetera?
Okay. I think, if I'm understanding this right, I'm getting a message, I think, from our charter board. I think that they would prefer to just pass it, and they can consider any of these changes and take their chances with the full board, if I'm understanding that correctly. Someone text me quickly, but in the meantime, let's have Mike Haynes, and then Brittany Cummins, and then Carol Lear.
Great. Thank you, Board Member Davis. I've read through this document. I thought it was great. I do understand and appreciate Chair Lear's comments and the attention to detail that she took in preparing some of these recommendations. However, I really feel good about the document and feel like it's important that we get it passed today. So I'm in support of approving this as is.
Thank you. Brittany Cummins?
Yeah, sorry, just a procedural comment is when there's a motion on the table and there's recommendations from one board member, it's hard to move forward unless there's an actual motion, not just suggestions. Otherwise, it's not the will of the full committee, it's just one person's comments. And so if there are things that we want someone to consider, then it needs to be a motion, and then the full committee weighs in through voting rather than just suggestions of individual members. So.
Thank you for those. So another clarifying question, Angie, if we pass it as is today, is it, could the State Charter School Board still consider feedback that they take through their board prior to the document coming to the full board, understanding there would be a risk in having all of these discussions with the full board, but can they alter the document once we pass it today before it comes to the full board and demonstrate it as edited?
And yes, the board could edit it and submit something else as backup for your consideration. And of course, they could always reconsider and say, you know, we had another month to consider this, and now we would like to submit version 2 in lieu of version 1. I think then we just might end up having a discussion as the full board about what's the difference between version 1 and version 2. Why did they do that? Questions from board members about their preference or not for that. So I think, and what I was trying to allude to, I think Vice Chair Cummins kind of verbally explained it better than I did, which is unless we as the committee give them an indication about how strongly the committee feels about this needs to be, yes, incorporated or not incorporated, or we're going to not approve it, that will probably be much clearer and more helpful to the State Charter School Board, so they know exactly which items they should consider. But if the direction is simply, we'd like you to consider incorporating these and let us know if you want to, then just know that that's the message, and the message might be thank you, but no thank you. So if that comes to the board that way, it's not the same as if you were to say, okay, of those 8 questions, we really feel strongly about number 4 or number 1. And then give that, have the committee members say we agree. That would be the best thing to do, ideally.
I understand that ideally, but as Board Member Cummins pointed out, it's difficult when you're not making motions about every single one of the 8 pieces along the way. So I'd be leaning toward passing today, but I'd probably speak toward passing today and then leaving it in their hands if they want to incorporate the feedback to possibly avoid all these conversations coming up again in full board. Angie, do we have 2 motions on the board, if I understand right? We have Brittany's motion to pass the document as is, and we have Carol's motion to a substitute motion to pass the document with a request that the feedback be considered. Is that?
Yes. So the amendment.
Which one do we need to do one before the other?
Mike, and I guess the question was when Board Member Lear made her motion, I'm not sure if anybody seconded it or amendment. Yeah. So then we vote on that first.
Can I jump in really quick and give some clarity on Robert's rules for committee?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So committee motions do not need seconds. And so, a substitute motion, it isn't one that we use, it would be an amendment. So Board Member Lear's motion would be an amended motion. And so you'd vote on the amendment first and then back to the main motion, which was to approve.
Okay, that's what I was thinking too. Thank you.
And Cindy, if I could just clarify, having raised my hand and
please, yes.
I clarify that my amendment, thank you for that correction, Brittany. I appreciate that. I would be comfortable with I'm not sure I'll vote for it, but I could live with an amendment to, or a motion to pass this out today with the satisfaction of expressing my concerns, putting those before 2 of the very excellent charter board members, as well as the director and some of her staff. And what I was sincerely asking for was consideration. I don't expect that all of that information will be accepted or changed by the state charter board, but I felt it was important for me. This process has been so troublesome for me that it was important for me to express the improvements that I think could be made, and then the charter board can address that as it will, and I may or may not bring up some of those issues in the board meeting. But I feel like this process is so important. We actually, the charter board, the board has by statute in a way, or the legislature has taken the authority of the board to open a school away from the board, gives that school a lot of money and a lot of autonomy. And I, as one board member, feel a real strong urgency to do everything I can to make sure that that school is not a mediocre school, but is an exemplary school. So I, having said that, I understand what consideration means, and I am fine about that. And I'll see what the document looks like when it comes back to the board. But I would still make the amended motion that the charter board consider these comments and then following up with Brittany's motion, consider an approval by this committee.
So Board Member Davis, if you'd like to have the committee vote on the
Yes.
amended motion.
Yes.
Amendment to the motion.
Yes. I will. I'd like to speak to the amendment and just add, and I didn't know where to put this add in, but I would also, and I don't want to add to the frustration here, but add a consideration of adding the words evidence-based instruction on page 8 in the special population section. I just noticed it now. I think we added those words in our other documents. And I know that Jennifer and Leah and I have had some conversations about that. It's not going to change me passing or not passing it, but if we could include evidence-based instruction in that special population section on page 8, or just a thought if you want to for the future. Let's go ahead and vote on, unless, do we have any other, one who wants to speak on to the amendment? I'll check for hands. Carol, your hand is still up. Do you want to speak again? Okay, seeing no hands. We'll vote on the amendment, which is to pass the charter document as is, with a request that the feedback today be considered by the State Charter School Board prior to coming to full board. Those in favor, please, let's use the checks and the X's.
I raised my hand on an iPad, Cindy. I'm not sure if you can see that.
Okay. I see a vote from Brittany Cummins, Lorianne Thorpe. Looks like the motion passes unanimously.
And so now you would vote on the underlying. You kind of combine the amendment with the.
Okay.
So essentially now you just restate the motion.
Okay.
With the amendment that just passed.
Okay, so the committee recommends that the board approve the State Charter School Board's process to approve satellite requests as amended. And do we need to also say and pass on to the full board?
Sorry, can I just jump in really quick?
Please do.
Sorry. So as amended wouldn't be appropriate because that would imply that we amended the document, but you would just state the amendment. So what was added to the motion so that what you added to the main motion. So it would be that we approve the State Charter School satellite process and ask them to consider some of the items that were mentioned. So, sorry to jump in.
Please vote on that motion.
And Board Member Davis, to answer your second question, there's no readings. The board just approves it. So we don't have to say anything about final reading or second reading. That's only a rule issue.
Thank you. That motion passes unanimously. And I just want to take a minute to say that, some of these last minute changes have come up, but prior to that, I feel like the State Charter School Board and Jennifer and her staff, they have been pretty excellent in reaching out and collaborating, and Chair Lear has taken a lot of time to communicate with them prior to this as well. And anyway, some last minute things came up with the USU approvals as well, but I really appreciate the respectful way that people are trying to work through this process together. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. With that, Cindy, are you okay if I go back to the non-controversial things?
I would be so happy if you were.
It's not all it's cracked up to be, is what I've learned. We're moving on to item 2.3, which is an action item, school leader performance assessment. And we have some participants, including Lisa Young, Malia Height, Darren Nielsen, and Jennifer Cronson. So I'll turn the time to you.
Good afternoon. This is Lisa Young. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Excellent. I'm Lisa Young, the Educational Leadership Specialist in Teaching and Learning, and thank you for your time today. So we're here today because Rule 277305 requires a superintendent to explore the adoption of a performance-based school leadership assessment and related recommendations to the board by September 1st, 2020. Staff has explored the adoption of a school leader performance assessment and are ready to make a recommendation to the board today. As background, a performance-based school leadership assessment is one of the recommendations made by the School Leadership Working Group that was approved by the board in 2018. The specific recommendation is to develop, adapt, or adopt a school leadership performance assessment that will allow candidates for the principalship to demonstrate their leadership, knowledge, and skills prior to receiving a credential or license. So our process to explore the school leadership performance assessment included 6 steps. Step 1, we located performance assessments in other states to look at. Step 2, we shared these assessments with UCEL. UCEL is short for our Utah Consortium of Educational Leadership. It's a group that includes representatives from all of our prep programs, our principal associations, our LEAs, and USBE staff. We asked the UCEL members for their input on both the selection of and the implementation of a school leadership performance assessment. Step 3, we initiated a request for information, an RFI, to solicit information from potential partners who could help us to develop, adopt, or adapt a performance assessment. Step 4, we analyzed the additional assessments that we uncovered in Step 1. Step 5, we returned to UCEL prep program representatives and their teams for feedback on what we had learned through the process to date. And Step 6, we engaged in multiple conversations with agency staff. This process informs the recommendation we present to you today. Our recommendation is that the committee forward to the full board a recommendation to engage stakeholders in the development, adaptation, or adoption of a school leadership performance assessment. We are also proposing a draft timeline that supports a thoughtful approach to the process. And here's our rationale for this recommendation. The school leadership performance assessment is one of the recommendations of the School Leadership Working Group. It was approved by the board in 2018, so it's important that we move it forward. However, there is important prerequisite work that needs to be done first. There's work to add additional clarity to the standards and competencies. There is also work to do to develop a thoughtful approach to the selection and implementation of the assessment. So our timeline takes all of this into consideration. It's a proposed timeline, a draft pending feedback from stakeholders. It includes summer 2020. We would draft a process, engage our stakeholders, and get feedback on our stakeholders on the process and the timeline. School year 2021, we'd focus on the standards and competency refinement and report our progress to the board. School year 21-22, we would create a plan for the selection and implementation of a school leadership performance assessment and report progress to the board with a recommendation to develop, adapt, or adopt a school leadership performance assessment. What questions do you have?
And I am looking for questions. And I don't see any. Does anybody on the committee have any questions for Lisa? Thank you for the presentation.
Board Member Davis has her hand up.
I didn't see that. Board Member Davis, please.
I asked this earlier before the meeting, and I just want to double check again to make sure that the people who are already principals are grandfathered in. This isn't going to become like a hoop they need to jump through. This is for people coming through the maybe principal preparation programs. And for example, typically at the end of those programs, you have to take like 8 hours of competency exams. This requirement would inform or perhaps replace the exams. I want to make sure I'm understanding that correctly. And then I just have one kind of question note on the graphic.
Thank you for that question. That's a great question. Yes, the process would be designed for candidates who are not in our current prep programs now. And what a lot of the states have done is actually had a multiple year phase-in process. We'll work through that in our proposed timeline. That's part of the thinking about being really careful and deliberate about the implementation of whatever we decide about the actual assessment itself.
Great, thank you. Chair, can I make my second?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So as we look at the school leadership graphic, we look on licensing on experienced principals. I'm not going to make a motion or anything to this nature, but the working group is kind of going through this, making edits and revisions. I would like to pose the question, if the relicensure requirements actually are rigorous, if they are simply tied to the educator relicensing. So for example, you have a level 2 educator relicensing and your relicense as a teacher educator and your administrative license hangs on that. And we consider that basic relicensure for a teacher, but perhaps not an additional rigorous process for a principal. I would suggest, and I'm not suggesting adding more for these poor people to do who are overworked and underpaid, but I am suggesting taking off the qualifier, the word rigorous, and just saying relicensure requirements, because I think it is more appropriate to where we actually stand. And then if we do that, then that leaves only one qualifying adjective on this visual, and that's over on preparation programs, where it says meaningful job embedded experiences. I would, to stay consistent with the whole thing, suggest considering taking that off and just putting job embedded experiences, because truly principals have to be skilled in management and they have to be skilled in instructional leadership. And some may define one more or less meaningful. I don't know. That could be addressed later in the verbiage in the document. However, if you want to leave it in with your working groups and your working groups want to, that at least could be true. I'm just not sure that this one over here on rigorous is actually true. And if your team deems it to be less true, maybe consider taking it off. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for that feedback. And yes, those are easy fixes. There's a whole fuller fleshed out document of the full recommendations from the working group and all kind of their thinking behind it in more detail. And so I agree that it would be appropriate on this graphic to make those edits that you recommend.
Thank you. And Lisa, I had a couple of questions and I had to take a phone call, so I apologize if you said this and I missed it. But two, and they should be kind of simple questions. One is this an alternative to the current principal or administrative preparation programs that exist? Is this a parallel opportunity to the ones that exist in higher education?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Oh, yeah.
Are you speaking specifically to the performance assessment?
Oh, right. So this is just specific to the assessment, not I'm just looking at all the mentoring, training, and support, and it feels like it's more than an assessment.
Oh, correct. This graphic represents the 14 different recommendations that approved in 2018.
Okay.
What this graphic does is it attempts to show how the different recommendations fall across the whole career trajectory of a principal.
Okay. All right.
So yes, we are working to advance these different recommendations. What we're bringing to you today is the specific
Just the assessment.
recommendation on the prep program, the assessment.
On the assessment. I did clearly miss something in thinking I could do two things at once. So thank you. That means I don't need to ask my second question. So thank you for that clarification. Any other questions from board member or from committee members? I'm seeing none. With that, we could have a motion if somebody's so inclined. Anybody?
I'll make the motion.
Please, go ahead.
I move that the committee forward to the full board a recommendation to engage stakeholders in the development, adaptation, or adoption of a school leadership performance assessment.
Thank you. Any further discussion to that motion? The motion is that the committee forward to the full board a recommendation to engage stakeholders, and I would say continue to engage stakeholders in the development, adaptation, or adoption of a school leadership performance assessment. Would you vote, please? And I can only see myself voting. Angie?
Yes, it is a unanimous with board member Cummins had to leave, so she is absent. So unanimous with one board member absent.
Absent. Thank you very much. And thank you so much for that very thorough presentation. I personally look forward to seeing how this whole opportunity plays out, because I really think principals need more training. We need to strengthen that part of our system. So thank you very much for all of you who are working on this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your leadership on this, and also for your support of our principals overall. Thank you.
Oh yeah, tough job. Thank you. Our next item, our last item, oh my gosh, is item number 2.4, R277-302, Educator Licensing Renewal. There's an amendment proposed. And to discuss that with us, Ben Rasmussen, Malia Height's available, Jennifer Thronson's available. So I'll turn that over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. What we are proposing today, or what staff is proposing for the license renewal rule, is one tiny thing and then one more significant change. The tiny change is just on line 76. You can see it on your screen. This is to make the rule consistent with other changes made in the licensing rules, changing that from 2 to 3 on line 76. The more significant change you'll find is the recommendation to strike section 8 from the rule. This is the rule that governs the returning educator relicensure program. The licensing staff feels that this does not, that it would be appropriate to discontinue this program. And licensing coordinator Malia Height will be happy to tell you a little bit more about her recommendation in that regard.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. And if nobody objects, Cindy and I had this discussion with Dr. Height and a couple of other staff members last week, and I found it helpful. I don't know that I completely have internalized a comfort level, but I would like to hear from Dr. Height, if that's okay.
Okay, this is Malia Height, Educator Licensing Coordinator for the Utah State Board of Ed. And in response to Chair Lear's request, with respect to the returning educator relicensure program, as you may be aware, the Utah State Board of Education is undergoing a technological wonder of trying to streamline all of educator data and education data within the USIM system. And although that is a multi-year process, the first phase of USIMS is to develop UTeach, which is the educator licensing portion of that system. And in one of the constraints within that system is a need to simplify and streamline licensing processes so that we can make sure that there is equitable access to licensing across the field and to minimize the exceptions to licensing rules. I just want to remind everyone that as part of this rule that has already been passed by the board, renewals for educator licenses has been widened so that educators who are not actively teaching are not penalized in that renewal process. They now require 100 points rather than 200 points, and the types of activities that allow them to renew their license is much wider. In addition, LEAs maintain the ability to give educators who are returning to education the option to license with an LEA-specific license that is approved by the local governing board of LEAs and then awarded by the Utah State Board of Education. So it is our hope that in an effort to streamline and simplify licensing processes as we subsume all of those things into USIMS, that the exception of returning educator relicensure be stricken from the rule.
Okay, thank you. I think that let me just, can I just would it be okay if I just reworded what you said in kind of a more simple way? Malia, is that okay? Just to make sure I understand.
Absolutely.
I think you're saying that you think that now the renewal process is sufficiently broad to make it equally easier for people returning to licensure. And so this special or designated process is no longer necessary. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that is accurate.
Okay, thank you. Did anybody else have other questions about this, the changes in this rule? I'm not seeing hands, but I'm not
Correct.
sure.
I do not see any hands, Chair.
Okay, then a motion we'd be ready for a motion if anybody's willing to do that.
And the motion should actually be draft 2, correct, Ben and Malia? Not draft 1.
Draft 2. Okay,
Yeah.
then I think Marianne's unmuted, so I'm assuming you're ready to make a motion.
Ready.
Thank you.
I move that the committee approve R277301 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for
302 draft 2, not 301.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Let me start over. I move that the committee approve R277302 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you. The motion is that the committee approve R277-302 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any additional discussion to this? Let me just add what I said before. I think this is such an important concern for education right now, that we have strong, prepared principals. And I almost feel like we did it better 10 or 15 years ago, and we've had a lapse. And so I'm really appreciative of this. So with that, will you please vote? And I see only my own vote, Angie.
So the vote is unanimous with Board Member Cummins absent.
Absent. Okay, so that is a unanimous
In favor.
encouragement and in favor of, yes, encouragement to do go forward and do good work. So thank you very much to all who participated. And I think that's the last item on our agenda, right? Unless I'm mistaken about that, Angie.
It is the last agenda item.
So thanks for your patience, and thanks for your patience with me as I went through my concerns about the process for satellite schools. Thanks, and have a delightful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Lear. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Mike.
Jerry, do I need to stop that recording or do anything, or just exit out?
You can just exit out.
Oh, thank you, Jerry.
You bet. Thank you.